I'm Jake Bruton with Aarow Building, and today we're at one of our projects in Columbia, Missouri, and we're going to talk about window installation and specifically the Andersen 100 series windows that we're using on this project. So let's talk overarching theory before we actually start fiddling with a window or actual materials. Number one, our entire conversation with subs or our in-house carpentry when we start talking about window installation is all we're doing is connecting control layers. We're looking for continuity in our water management, we're looking for continuity in our air control layer, and we're looking for our thermal control layer to be continuous as well. So how do we get there? How's it work? What does what job? That's where I would start the conversation with our teams. Number one, water is the most important thing, so that's why we're talking about it first. That's why I talk with my subcontractors about it. What in the assembly is managing for water? So in this instance, we're using the zip system sheathing and tapes and sealants and our Andersen window. Those things together are our water control layer. There are other systems that you can use. There are fluid applied, there are fully adhered, there are sheet goods, there are a lot of different systems. The key here is just understanding what you're asking the product to do and why. So when we start talking about the install, let's mentally install the window real quick and get it like fastened into place, and then we'll talk about the control layers again. So from here, we're going to check the rough opening size to make sure the window is going to fit. We always open and inspect the window before actually doing anything else from that point. We will place the window in the opening so that it's centered, and then we'll level plumb and square and inspect for operation. I know that that's exactly how the instructions say it, level plumb and square, check for operation. Those last two parts, square and check for operation, are super important because if you install it, even if it's level and plumb, but it's not exactly square, I know it sounds silly that it might be like that, the operation might not be perfect. And this is the point where we're trying to nail the detail where it operates perfectly. So we're going to stick the window in. We're going to run it in and out a bunch of times. We're going to use the lock. These happen to be casements, but even in a hung window, we're going to operate. We're going to lock and unlock. We're going to make sure that it works perfect so that we're not proceeding with any of the other measures that we're about to apply so that then we have to work backwards to repair something at some point. Once we're ready to start our control layer continuity operations, we're back to that water conversation. In this instance, our water control layer is the zip system sheathing and the tape. So when we stick our window in, it's just about connecting the window to that in a proper fashion where water is going to be properly managed. The manufacturer notes in their instructions that we should have shingle lap on all of our pressure-sensitive adhesives that go around the flange of this window. Meaning, once the window's in, we have to install our jamb sides before our head so that everything laps over the layer below it. That's the shingle. If the window gets rained on, it's going to shed water continuously until the water's past the opening. In this case, we're going to leave the bottom flange of the window open, and we've waterproofed the sill of our rough openings. This is in case we ever have an installation error or any water or moisture actually gets into this opening. We're open to the outside and our tape actually feeds out of the opening. Any water that gets in here can find its way out. If the water's on the outside of the wall, we're not concerned with it at all because water here is no different than water falling out in the yard. It's outside our envelope, we're not concerned with it. So if we're leaving the bottom flange open, how are we dealing with continuity of air control? Because that flange could be an air leakage. Well, this is why we have zip tape so far into the opening and why we have zip on the jambs and the head of the opening is because we've actually taken our air control layer to the inside face of the wall so that when we set this window in place, we can use a fluid applied on the inside or a tape on the inside so that we can connect that control layer for air to the jamb, the head, the sill. Everything can be continuous. So we have our water management, we have our air management. The third one that I mentioned was thermal. In this case, we are going to use a backer rod behind our sealant, and we're going to use that as our only insulation in this install. We are in a fairly mild climate. We're climate zone 4. We're not worried about cramming as much insulation in the window as we possibly can. We're most worried about continuity of the other 2 control layers. The manufacturer says you can use a fibrous insulation and stuff that, and you're even allowed to use a can foam as long as it's specified for window and door insulation. In our methods, we don't use a can foam because that always ends up falling on the least experienced carpenter on the crew, and then all of a sudden we have a mess with can foam that has to be cleaned up. So it's just not part of our install procedures anymore. Let's go ahead and set this window in place, and we'll talk through how we're handling everything as we go, and you'll get to see it all one more time. So let's do it now. Now that we've set the window in place, we've shimmed it on both ends. This is actually 2 units that are molded together at the factory, so we actually shimmed underneath the mold as well. We're going to use screws to fasten through the nailing fin. The reason we're using screws is we have a generation of carpenters that are like the generation right below me that use screw guns and nail guns and not hammers. So I don't want people swinging a hammer next to the window. Also, you should note that the manufacturer does not allow any pneumatic fasteners next to the window. You could vibrate the insulated glass. You could cause any other number of issues by using a nail gun. In this house, the zip control layer that we keep talking about is actually a zip R, so it's that green OSB with a continuous polyiso insulation behind it. The manufacturer requires that you omit that around the opening so that when you're fastening to something solid. So we have a 1.5 by 1.5 block that rings our rough opening. That's what we're going to screw to now. We'll tack the top 2 corners. We'll check level, plumb, and square one more time. We'll check diagonal, and then you'll see us check the operation multiple times before we move on to fully fastening. The reason we're going to tack up top, if you tack down here, the window may fall out. That's simple. Our carpenter is running the window in and out. Okay, go back in. And it's hitting ever so slightly there. It's not hitting on frame, it's just the weather stripping's a little more tight. And it's going in just fine at the bottom, but not at the top. So my experience tells me that this side needs to go over just a tiny bit, and then we're able to re-square the window inside this opening. We'll do that, we'll tack it, we'll test it again. Now that the window is securely fastened into the rough opening, next is connecting our water control layer from the window to our water control layer on our wall. And we're going to do that with the tape like I talked about earlier. We're going to do both the jamb sides and then the head. Now that our tape is installed per the manufacturer's recommendations, that's the end of our water control layer. Now we're going to move inside and we're going to hit the air control layer and thermal control layer in one process. Okay, now that we've moved to the interior side, our thermal control layer is a simple piece of backer rod. That backer rod is going to serve the purpose as being our backer for our fluid applied sealant, and it's going to serve insulative properties. The challenge here is getting all of our liquid applied membrane on without getting it on everything. So if you were worried about that, you could go to a tape at this point and just tape from the window to the jambs, head, and sill. That gives you continuity on the inside. Now we have a window that is securely fastened in the opening, is water controlled on the outside, air and thermal control in the opening or on the interface of the window. We have a window installation that's finished. I will tell you that we leave the protective film on the inside for the duration of the project. It's just that much less cleaning that we have to do on those windows. The other thing is the fenestration sticker on the interior. That is a non-replaceable sticker. It goes with this window, with this glass, how this was tested. So you have to make sure you keep those for your homeowners or your clients. We do peel the outside wall. We're here most times because we don't want to put a ladder back up just to peel film at some point. But the protective film stays on the inside for cleaning purposes, for protection purposes. And now we have a window that we're not worried is going to leak. We have a window that is going to be a long-term install, and now we have something that's not leaking from a air, water, or thermal standpoint. So check out the Andersen 100 series windows. Check out more on the installs in the future.